Greetings, this is Stan Houston, and we're here to talk about, does God want you to be an entrepreneur? But of course, we're not making it into a question. We said, God wants you to be an entrepreneur, and now you have to deal with it. And my guest today, who's going to be a part of the ongoing part of the program, because we're going to hopefully add entrepreneurs and their story, their strategies, perhaps some of their skills. And from time to time, they'll share a little bit of their stupidity, because that's how we all learn things. And so we can continue to ask ourselves the question is, what is God's plan for our life? And does it include full-scale entrepreneurship? Or does it mean that perhaps we need to think and act like one and perhaps be that kind of person where God has put us in our present situation? Tim Hoerr, you are an entrepreneur. And tell us when you first discovered that and how it happened.
That is a great question, Stan. I would have to say I grew up in a landscaping business, and I think discovered along the way that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wasn't quite sure I was cut out for it, but probably in my teen years, I had a sense that entrepreneurship was where I was ultimately headed.
When that happened, did that lead you in any particular way of starting to prepare yourself, or you just kept an opportunity eye open?
Yeah, I think it was more the latter, just kind of keeping my antenna up. I always had this sense of calling, as it were. I felt that God would direct me into my ultimate calling. My early interpretation of that is that I'd probably ultimately be sent into the mission field or
Right.
pastoral work. And I had a hard time reconciling, this desire to do entrepreneurial things with that. But so I kind of had these dual things competing with one another, so to speak. And ultimately, it did get reconciled. Many years later, when I went out into the real world, work world. But yeah, I think it was more just a general awareness in those early days.
Oftentimes I just simply say to people, tell me your story. And when I do that, I'll just find out where they start. And so if I would say to you, tell me your story, where would it start and where would it bring us today?
Good question. Well, I would have to say, it really did start, probably started very, very early on, probably 5 or 6 years old. I really had this sense again, of calling. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I felt that it most likely would lead me into ministerial type work, the traditional definition of calling.
Isn't that that's what's happened to us, hasn't it? That
exactly. I think many of us have, sort of fallen into that conventional definition of what it means to be called, or to do the Lord's work, as it were. And the reality is He's called all of us, and of course many of us are called to the marketplace and called to entrepreneurship. So for me, I think it was a progression through those teen years of working in the family business and thinking this is pretty cool. I like the idea of providing excellent products to customers. The customers are happy with the things that we're doing, both product and service. We collect a fee for that. It helps us to grow the business. That whole concept was really quite appealing to me. I had a conversation with my dad, who was both the head of the business as well as a lay minister in our church denomination, about what I would do for college. And we boiled it down to kind of 2 or 3 options. I derived out of that conversation, which was probably scripted on the part of my dad, now thinking about it, that I would go into accounting. I would go off and get a few years of experience, and perhaps I'd come back and work in the family business, or perhaps I'd then, go on to fulfill my real calling. Went out into the accounting world, and as I share in a book I've written called Risking It, in 1989 at a small group leader retreat with our church, felt sort of this major inflection point happening. I sensed that this would be the moment where clarity of calling would come. Again, I thought it would be into the ministry, but God had other ideas. And it was an affirmation that I came out of this small group leader retreat thinking and actually convinced that I was to stay in the marketplace and that I was to be as excellent of a business person as I could possibly be. I remained with the accounting firm actually for a number of years, 15 in total. And it was really at that point then, in the late 90s, that I had the opportunity to finally become an entrepreneur and leave the accounting firm and, do the entrepreneurial thing, more full time.
When that finally happened to you, how was it? How did that what was the first time that you were starting to do something in which you raised your hand and said, "Yep, I'm an entrepreneur, big E. I'm not playing around with it anymore. I have finally taken the move to that status in life, and I'm going to live differently," because it does mean to live differently.
It does. For me, it was the middle of 1998. I had spent the previous 15 years with a public accounting firm. I'd been promoted to partner. Was experiencing all the perquisites and the fine salary that a partner in an accounting firm makes, and had an opportunity to write a book called "Thank God It's Monday," which was the whole concept of that book was about aligning your life purpose with your work. As I read and reread the drafts of that book, a very interesting thing happened. I became convinced that it was time to step off of the cliff, so to speak, and step out of the safe confines of an accounting firm and start my own company. And that was that was the big E moment, right? Stepping off the cliff and becoming an entrepreneur. The big salary has disappeared. The big office is gone. All of those, people ordering your office supplies and all of that sort of thing was a distant memory. All of a sudden, it was me and the four walls.
How did your family respond to that decision?
My wife was very supportive of it, at least initially, and felt like this was, what I was wired to do and called to do and so forth. But it got fairly difficult. I'd say the next 18 to 24 months were probably the most difficult months, 2 years of my life, really, up to that point in time, and probably since. I encountered really one failure after another. It was lost engagements. It was contracts that disappeared. It was broken promises. It was a variety of things. It was sort of, just one bad thing after another. And that was the most difficult part of that was I felt like I was letting my family down and, letting my wife down. That, I'd been there as a provider all of those years, and now I wasn't so sure anymore.
Yeah. I have a friend who tells the story when he finally made that decision. He had, 4 children, wife, and they were all going out on a family outing, and he said to her, "Oh, by the way, we have to stop at the bank for a moment." And so he went and stopped at the bank and brought some papers and said, "Honey, you just have to sign this. Because we're married, we have to sign this." And so right there in the car, he had her sign it and then ran back into the bank. And later on, she discovered that she had just signed away the second mortgage on the house.
I had a similar experience.
Okay.
I did, yeah. A couple of years later, I became the co-founder of a technology company creating cell sorters, biological cell manipulation equipment here in the research park at the University of Illinois. And a couple of years into that, the same thing happened. We needed some funding, and the bank was willing to help, but I too had to have Tony come with me and sign off on a piece of paper that really meant the bank could come and repossess our home if things didn't quite work out.
My goodness, I didn't know that you had. That's just one of my stories from a dear entrepreneur who
Yeah.
became a serial entrepreneur. But he tells that story of that incredible risk taking, and that's your title of your book, and that's what I really wanted to get to, because
Mhm.
we can talk about the theoretical things of entrepreneurship, and those of people who've taken the class know that I go through some theory and some
Right.
theology behind it, and then obviously some realities behind it. But the reason I wanted you particularly to lead it off is because you are the one who deals with the big R word.
Right. Right.
And so I'd ask you to think about, give me a theology of risk. And what I mean by theology, something that kind of explains how God, man, and the world fits in to
Sure.
risk.
Sure. Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, actually. Many, many years ago, probably 25 or 30 years ago, the founder of the Vineyard Church movement, John Wimber, had a saying, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. That was my first encounter with the concept, or the theology, that risk really was a spiritual concept, so to speak. I liked that saying. I felt it mostly had, specifically spiritual meaning, as in risk it by praying for somebody, or risk it by, increasing your charitable giving. And it does mean those things, but it means a lot more than that. I think I've come to understand that risk is one of the primary ways that God aligns us with his bigger story. He invites us into risks, both small, medium, and large. He asks us continuously to step out of the boat, step out of our comfort zone, and take a risk. And in so doing, we align our story. We become part of the bigger thing that he's doing in setting everything right in the creation. And at the same time, our faith is impacted. We are stretched. We might feel like we're sort of hung out there for a while. We become utterly dependent on the Lord to move us through the ultimate resolution of that risk. So I think it's actually at the center of a lot of what is happening in Scripture, and ultimately it is the chief vehicle by which our faith becomes real and our lives are transformed.
Those of you who are watching this, I would encourage you to pause it, go back 3 minutes, and play that again, and perhaps play it 7 times, as I was told, the marketing rule of 7. That is exactly what I wanted to come out, because that's what struck me, because I've gone through as an entrepreneur, and I'm going through a kind of a scary part of it now. You thought, well, does it ever end?
Right.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't ever end. It just keeps on going. And so that's a part of where life is at. And like you said, now even my phone, which I thought was turned off, is going. That's the risk we take. But the thing about all of the things that we do is, my wife and I have to work on the fact that we have given up a certain amount of real certainty in our life. And it has been some very painful growth. But at the same time, I look back and say, I'm sure glad I've gone through that in many ways.
Right.
Though I'm not necessarily sure I liked it at the time, nor do I. I think my line is, this'll look really good in the memoir, but it's no fun now.
That's right. And it isn't a whole lot of fun, to go through, particularly, the more harrowing moments of a risk. And God doesn't guarantee us necessarily the outcome of our risk taking is going to be X, Y, or Z. Now, we might envision it to be as such, and sometimes indeed it does work out that way. Usually the timing, of course, is much different than we had anticipated. But sometimes the outcome of the risk taking is a complete failure, or a setback, or stepping into a new challenge. Those moments are not a lot of fun, but I take great comfort in knowing that in the middle of that, God is for me. He's good. He's promised that he'll sustain me and transform me and grow me through that moment. And in the middle of it, he actually, Jesus has got this great quote in Ephesians where he tells us to embrace suffering and setback, to embrace it. This is the Message translation.
Yeah.
And that he will show us, ultimately more of himself in the middle of that process, and he'll bring us through it. That's a very powerful analogy. I don't think I'm very good at it. I don't think I'm, very excited about embracing setback or failure or challenge. But indeed, it's one of the things that he tells us to do. And yes, we are better off for it. And I do like looking in the rearview mirror more so than I do actually going through it.
The bugs on the windshield.
That's right.
Okay. Well, now tell us, in the book Risking, and by the way, I just want to really encourage that, and we'll make sure that's a point. But and I particularly want to point out that you really performed part of my prejudices rather than doing a fact case study. I've oftentimes said is that storytelling is the only effective means of communication. Yeah. So his book is actually not a textbook or even a theology book or even a business book. It's a memoir. It's a story. And I think that's very powerful and very effective. And so what your story came to, there's a variety of instances and number of good things you can learn there, but primarily it is a storytelling of a man who went through, is going through, probably will go through again, the process of going through risks and then understanding that the business will come out of that, but even more so, the spirit may emerge from that. Have I got you right on that?
I think, yeah, exactly. It was interesting, Stan, that in the process of writing the book, it was about a 3.5 or 4 year process. Mm-hmm. About in the middle of that, I hired a professional editor, and the editor began reading drafts. And really at that point, it was more a collection of, business anecdotes and things of that nature. It really wasn't a memoir. And he said, I think this is good, but it could be great. And how it could be great is really tell us your story. And so from that point on, it took another 2 years to essentially rewrite it into a memoir to, share little vignettes, little stories within the larger story. And I'm happy with the outcome of it. The response from many readers has been, it's encouraged them in their own stories to take another step and to keep going, and maybe to see this whole entrepreneurial thing from a different angle than they'd originally imagined it. So
well, I will have to say the contribution to me was very much so, as I say, behind every good project, there is some theology. And you really helped me understand that it's not just, okay, I've got Genesis 1 down, it's good to create things. But the fact that you say that the entrepreneurship, faith is risk and risk is faith. I remember one man said to me, he said, was a long-time old preacher, and he went through some difficult times, and he just very honestly said to me, Stan, it was sure easier to preach about this faith business than it was
so true.
to practice it, And so you put that together in, I think, one of the better ways that I've seen it integrated, and that's why I really wanted you to be the lead off on this. Who knows where it's going to lead us in our conversation, but entrepreneurship is not just a way of thinking, it's a way of living, but it's also a way of on the path of faith.
Yes.
That's the deal. I'd like to close with something that I talked to my wife about the other day, because we're starting another new venture.
Okay.
And she said, how's this going to go? And we're going up and down. And I said, let me tell you the story. And that's one of my lines. Well, tell you a story. And you tell the story called Pounding on the Gates of Heaven. Mm. And I wrote that down, and in your book here, I've got it outlined and headlined, but that's where I'm going to go to. You can kind of finish our story by telling about pounding on heaven. Heaven pounding, I call it.
Yeah, There've been a couple of, well, probably more than a couple. There've been probably dozens of moments where I've pounded on heaven. In the book, I tell a story of after we had started this bio instrument company here in the research park, we had a very interesting solid state laser product. It replaced very large argon ion lasers that consumed three-phase power. They needed to be water cooled. So in short, it with plug-in power, with no water cooling, with superior solid state lasers, it outperformed the existing technology probably on 5 or 6 different fronts. I assumed this piece of technology, this scientific instrument, would sell itself, right? I mean, easy enough. Little did I realize that in a very well-established research field or scientific field, the newcomer, our company was a startup, it was a newcomer, was immediately finding itself competing with much more well-established, entrenched competitors. We were dealing also with, obviously, ignorance of who we were as a little company. We had any number of challenges that I had not anticipated. And we were...
You had a superior product.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was confounding to me. But 3 or 4 months after introducing this new product to the marketplace and wearing out a lot of shoe leather and airline tickets, attempting to peddle and sell this, what I completely believed in, and having no results. In fact, after 3 or 4 months, we'd sold 0. We formed... I had a colleague that flagged me down at church and asked if there was anything he could, pray for me about. And short story, this colleague, myself, and another partner in business began meeting weekly to for just 30 minutes or so pray. And again, it was pounding on heaven. We were crying out. It was a no holds barred encounter with Lord. We believe you've called us to bring this new technology to the marketplace. We believe it solves some critical problems. It's a great solution, but we're not seeing the results. And we pounded on heaven for a series of probably another 2 or 3 months. I don't recall the exact timing. Meeting every week. And ultimately, the dam did break. The water gushed forth, and we went on to sell many millions of dollars worth of these laser systems. But I really do attribute its ultimate success to that 2-3 month period of time when another believer came together with me and my business partner and just put our request out before the Lord, and fully convinced He'd led us to do it. But we just weren't seeing the results that we had hoped for. And sure enough, 2-3 months of pounding on heaven and just crying out to the Lord in a very humble way. And indeed, He came through and answered our prayer. Thank God.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been great. Just to kind of review, once again, my name is Stan Hustad, and we're talking about wit, what it takes, so wisdom, insight, and truth, but it also takes risk-taking, and that's what it's about. So Tim has been glad to share with us. First of all, think in terms of your own life, and I'm sure he'd be glad to be in contact with you, because we have a joint mission to teach young men and women that happiness is not found in a corner office in some corporate suite necessarily.
That's
It
right.
could be called to that, but it could be called to something else where you're allowed to really create who you are and create the life and destiny that you want. That should be considered in God's sight and plan. We also want you to understand that taking the entrepreneurial risk is something that may deepen your faith profoundly. In fact, maybe that's what God really wants you to do. I still remember St. Paul saying when you're weak, I'll be strong. And even, Sarah Young in Jesus Calling says, when you're in deep trouble, that's when you'll seek His presence in greater ways. And so there is a theology behind entrepreneurship, and it will help deepen your faith. And part of that might be is that you do what you were made to do, and that is to say, Abba, Father, and pound on the gates of heaven.
Well
Any
said.
closing words for us, Tim, and then we'll call it a day, but we'll come back again sometime.
Well, I think, Stan, there's a major move of the Spirit today, particularly amongst younger folks, teens, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and of course, us older folks can join the movement as well. And it's a stirring within individuals. It's a stirring of bringing people together into teams. But it's just as you said. The corporate office suite isn't for everybody. God has major plans to bring many people into entrepreneurship and to see this integration of faith with our work in the whole journey of being called as co-creators with Him. It's a fabulous thing. I think many exciting things are going to be happening over the next 10 years. And it's encouraging to be able to provide some concepts and tools and resources to the people that are experiencing this phenomenon. So very cool stuff. So glad to be part of your program, which I think is one of the key resources to folks going through this. But exciting times ahead, and just glad to be part of it.
Thank you. And in some way, shape, or form, we claim God wants you to experience entrepreneurship. Thank you, Tim. All the best to you. Take care.
Thank you, Stan.